Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and call to order the Thursday, August 10th, 2023, 1:30 p.m. Canvassing Board meeting being held at King County Elections headquarters here in Renton, Washington for the August 1st, 2023 primary and special election. I am Canvassing Board member Julie Wise, your King County Director of Elections, and with me I have Canvassing Board member Kimberly Frederick, Chief Civil Deputy in the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and Stephanie Sirkovich, Chief of Staff to the King County Council. We are also staffed today by Geraldine Hampton, our King County Elections Ballot Processing Manager. This meeting is being live streamed via the King County Elections Facebook page and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel after this meeting. For our first item, Geraldine will be providing an overview on the primary election. And just a reminder again that we're all going to try to speak loud into the microphone to ensure those streaming in can hear us clearly. Thank you. Geraldine, take it away, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to do our annual review of the voter intent guide and the rules on what is or is not a vote. Then we have 12 ballots with voter intent questions for the board to review. So first up, we're going to take a look at our voter intent manual here. There's extra copies for those who are here in person. There are a series of rules that cover all things around ballots, such as ink in a target area, what's a correction, what's an overvote or write-in, and so on. So that's what we'll be reviewing today. If we go ahead and jump to page 2, our voter intent guidebook tells us that if there are any marks made in the target area, it shall be counted as a valid vote. Any marks made outside the target area shall be counted as a vote only if they form a pattern of similar marks as outlined in Rule B. We'll get to that in a minute here. Or if they qualify as written instructions per Rule E. Again, we'll get to that in a minute. A specific rule that's outlined in the book for us, though, is if we see a mark that traces or outlines the target area, it's not going to be considered a vote unless the voter does this as a pattern throughout their ballot. Just like when you learned grammar in school, they give you rules and immediately give you a bunch of exceptions. So we have 4 exceptions to this rule that any mark in a target area is a vote. It's always going to be a vote unless it's an obvious stray mark that happens to go through the target area. It's going to be a vote unless it's a hesitation mark. Sometimes you might call it a pen rest. It's going to be a vote unless it's part of a written note. Sometimes voters like to share their feelings with us, and the words will go through the target area. Not going to be considered a vote. And then if the voter follows the instruction we put on the ballot where they line out their first selection, fill in another target area, that's going to be considered a correction, and we'll talk more about corrections in a minute. If we jump forward to page 3, you can see some examples of different types of marks that we might see inside a target area. So for the example on the upper left-hand side of the screen, we've got an X in the target area. To the right of that, we have a completely filled-in oval. That's what we like. On the lower left, you see a tiny little check mark. Still going to be a valid vote because that's a mark in the target area. And then there's a larger check mark there on the lower right-hand side, still a valid vote. So all 4 of those selections are valid votes. On page 4, it's similar examples, just using a different tabulation system as the example. Here you can see there's rectangle target areas, but all 4 of those selections are marks inside the target area. Those are all 4 considered to be valid votes. Again with page 5, for all 4 of those contests on this sample ballot, there's only one contest in the upper left-hand corner. Teddy Roosevelt has a mark inside the target area. That's going to be the only valid vote for this example. If you jump to page 6 here, you can see there's only one contest here that has a mark inside the target area. That's the one in the upper left-hand corner. Teddy Roosevelt is the only valid vote in this example page. Okay, jumping ahead to page 7, this is an example of a phenomenon that we see that actually has a name. It's called voter fatigue. So this rule is telling us that if the voter starts out strong and fills out the entire oval, and yet subsequent contests as you go down the ballot get smaller and smaller, those are still going to be all considered valid votes. Even this one in the lower right-hand corner, still going to be a valid vote. Although you might think it's a hesitation mark or something, it's not, because we can see the markings just got weaker and weaker as the voter completed their ballot. All valid votes. All right, page 8, another example of voter fatigue, just on that rectangular target area ballot example. Jumping to page 9, example 4A is showing a solid filled-in target area for Teddy Roosevelt and then an oval trace on William Henry Harrison. The valid vote is Teddy Roosevelt because we just heard that an oval trace or outlining an oval is not considered a vote. Example 4B shows 0 votes because those are all oval traces, or rectangle traces, I should say, in that instance. All right, jumping ahead to page 10, here's our first exception here to a mark in a ballot, a mark in a target area always being a vote. Here we have an obvious stray mark. So in that lower left-hand contest, there's a mark that just happens to go through one of the ovals, not a valid vote. That is going to be considered a stray mark. On page 11, we see a somewhat similar example, although in this instance, there is a mark filled in for one of the candidates for James Monroe. There's also a stray mark that happens to go through the oval for Clara Barton. This is not going to be considered a overvote. The vote stays for James Monroe. All right, page 12 is showing example 2A and 2B. These are different ballot examples, but there's a strike through of a candidate that happens to go into the oval. These are considered stray marks as well, and neither of these examples would be counted as valid votes. This is assuming the rest of the ballot has marks on it, or votes on it, I should say. And let's see, page 13 here is showing another exception to Rule A about a mark in a target always being a vote. For example 1A, we've got a solid oval filled in for Teddy Roosevelt, a little pen rest, a hesitation mark for Abigail Adams. The vote is going to stay for Teddy Roosevelt. Same with example 1B, the vote will stay with Teddy Roosevelt. Page 14 here is showing us a similar example, only that the secondary target area has a little bit more ink in it. Still going to consider that a hesitation mark. There's a solid filled in response area with a little more movement in the pen, but still going to be considered a hesitation mark. Page 15 here takes it even further. So in this instance for 3A and 3B examples, it looks like there's a completely filled in target area for Teddy Roosevelt, and then maybe a quarter of the oval and rectangle filled in for Abigail Adams. But again, the vote is still going to stay with Teddy Roosevelt as the valid vote for these examples. Here is an example of a voter sharing feelings with us on their ballot. Because some of the words happen to go through a target area, these are still not considered to be votes. It's just writing on the ballot that happens to go through there. Written notes are not considered votes. Similar example, someone just sharing their feelings with us, still not going to be considered valid votes. All right. We're moving on to Rule B that has a lot of separate parts here, so we'll take it paragraph by paragraph. So first paragraph on page 18, marks made outside the target area shall be counted as valid votes as long as those marks form a pattern of similar marks. All races and issues for which the voter has indicated a choice outside the target area must have a similar mark. So this is where it's important to know it's any type of mark. It could be an X, it could be a check mark. It doesn't matter if it's a really big X or little x. The fact that it's an X makes it the similar type of mark. Okay? So moving on to the second paragraph here, marks made outside the target area may be counted as valid votes, even if there's one pattern of similar marks on one page, like the front of the ballot, and a separate pattern of marks used on the other page, the back of the ballot. So you could have all checks on the front and all X's on the back. Those would still all be valid votes. Third paragraph here tells us that marks made outside of the target area shall be counted as valid votes if there's one pattern of similar marks used for measures and another or separate pattern used for candidate races. Fourth paragraph down, if some marks are in the target area and some are not, but the same type of mark is used, all such marks shall be counted as valid votes. Next here, if the marks strike through a candidate's name or ballot measure response in a pattern of similar marks throughout the ballot, all such marks shall be counted as valid votes. So that strike-through example we looked at a couple pages back, if they do that throughout the entire ballot, those are all going to be valid votes. Second to last item here on this page, a mark made outside the target area on a ballot that contains only one race or measure is not required to form a pattern. It's a confusing way to say you can have a pattern of one. So if a voter makes a mark and it's the only thing they've selected on the ballot, it can be a pattern of one. If we are in a spring election, they only have one item on their ballot and they make a mark, that would be also considered a vote. All right, so we've got a bunch of examples to take a look at. So in this example on page 19, this voter is using a series of check marks. None of them happen to go into the ovals, but they're all going to be considered valid votes because we can clearly discern which response the check mark is attached to. Taking a look at example on page 20, this example is using circles. There are circles that aren't even circling the same amount of each contest, but they are using the same type of mark. Therefore, these are all valid votes as well. Page 21 is my favorite page. It shows a great example of, we've got a couple of the top contests have the mark inside the target area. The two contests on the bottom are outside the target area, but we know based on the voter intent rules of Washington State, these are all valid votes, even though some are within the target area and some are outside the target area. All valid votes. Same example here on page 22. We've got a couple check marks that are inside the target area, a couple that are outside. This lower right-hand contest even has a check mark on the far right-hand side of the candidate there. Still going to be a valid vote. All right, so for this example on page 23, we can see the voter used a series of different types of marks, but they did not use a pattern. So for this example, there's only one valid vote on this page, and that's going to be the vote for Thurgood Marshall because they showed us they know how to fill in the oval. None of these other marks go in the target area. Therefore, Thurgood Marshall is the only valid vote. Same with page 24. Three of these contests have check marks. Only one is filled in the target area. Therefore, the only valid vote is Thurgood Marshall. Page 25 here shows us an example where you can see there's one pattern on the front of the ballot using check marks and a different pattern on the back just filling in the oval. All of these are going to still be considered valid votes. There's one pattern on the front, a separate pattern on the back. Page 26, this is considered one ballot for this example. The front page here is showing that there are measures are being circled. On the back of the page, you can see candidate names are being underlined, and there's one more measure on the back corner, again being circled. Therefore, all of these are valid votes because you can use one pattern for candidates, one separate pattern for measures. Page 28 gives us a little more information about one mark on a ballot. When a voter returns a ballot having marked only one race or measure, the mere act of returning a ballot indicates the voter wished to cast a vote or make their opinion known in that race or measure. Because a pattern cannot be established when a voter marks only one race or measure, marks made on a single race or measure must be considered a vote if the voter's intent can be determined. And I think we have a question for you in our 12 ballots. A little foreshadowing there.
Okay, flag that page.
All right, so the next set of pages, there's a series of examples of what might a one single mark on a ballot look like. What kind of looks would it take? So you see an underline, you see a circle. Example 1C looks like the voter signed their selection. You can see something that would normally look like a correction to an undervote, but if it's the only thing they did on a ballot, it's going to be called a vote, per Washington State voter intent rules.
Because, Jerome, that's sort of the philosophy there, right, is that a voter took the time to get registered to vote, to get familiar with the issues on the ballot, to vote their ballot, and to return it. And the idea would be not to have necessarily a blank ballot returned.
Correct. Absolutely. The act of turning in their ballot shows they're trying to tell us something about this election. Page 30 has a series of other examples. You can see someone wrote approved next to the approved. Example 2B has an arrow. 2C is an interesting circle connecting the oval to the response. And example 2D is a line connecting to the response. Page 31 has a series of other examples, circling parts of the name, writing yes next to a response, even putting a line through a response if it's the only thing they did on a ballot that should be considered a vote. This one here, even with an X next to the name, if it's the only thing on the ballot, should be a vote, or is a vote, I should say. So on page 32, these are showing us also a single mark on a ballot. So example 4A and 4B are different ballots. It looks like a correction, but again, if it's the only thing they did on the ballot, going to be considered a valid vote. And here's an example of a ballot that has a lot of items on there, or a lot of contests, but the voter decided only to circle one response in the president-vice president contest. So that's going to be considered a vote, even though there's no ink in the target area. All right, moving on to Rule C, we're going to learn about corrections here. So if the voter has followed the instructions for correcting a vote, the stricken vote shall not be counted. If a second choice is marked, it shall be counted as a valid vote. If a second choice is not marked, the race shall be considered undervoted. Correction to an undervote. If the voters mark two target areas and put an X or a slash, could be half an X, over the marked area, the choice without the X or slash shall be counted as a valid vote. So here are examples of what a regular correction would look like. Filling in one response, changing your mind, putting a line through it, and then filling in another target area. The vote would be for William Henry Harrison on both of those examples. Page 36 shows a correction to an undervote. So both example 2A and 2B, they made a correction. This is again with other selected responses throughout the ballot. This would then be called an undervote. Page 37 shows a different type of correction voters might make, using an X to place over the response they do not want, and then leaving the one they do want unmarked, or uncrossed out, I should say. Example on page 38 is showing a correction using half of an X or a slash. Again, the valid vote would be Abigail Adams. All right, Rule D on page 40 is when is it not a correction? Okay, so if the voter has marked a choice correctly and placed an X in the same target area, but there's not a second selection made, then it's going to be counted as a valid vote. And then the final sentence there, changes made by the voter to the wording printed on a ballot will not invalidate votes cast for that race or measure. So here's some examples on page 41. Example 1A and 1B and 1C and 1D are all showing a single selection target area filled in with an X or part of an X through the target area. These are all going to be valid votes. Example on page 42 here shows the voter filled in the target area for yes. They put an X on top of it, going to be a valid vote for yes. They decided to, for the language in the levy, cross some words out, maybe change a word. We just ignore that. We're not changing the actual results of the election. We just ignore that. All right. On to Rule E, written instructions. If the voter has attempted to vote or correct a vote by providing written instructions regarding their intent, it shall be counted as a vote per the voter's instructions. Written instructions can and they do include words, circles, lines, or arrows. Here are some examples. Example 1A, it looks like they tried to correct their vote. They knew it was a little messy. They circled it. So we would have the valid vote be for Abigail Adams. Example 1B, it looks like they had a couple corrections. They wanted to help us out. They put no's next to the one they don't want. They put a yes next to the one they do want. I like the example in 1C. They put an arrow and they said this one to help us know what they wanted to vote for that particular contest. Rule F, identifying marks. Marks identifying the voter, like initials, signatures, or addresses, do not disqualify a ballot. We'll just not look at it and ignore it. So we've got examples here on page 47. In this instance, the voter signed the top of their ballot. We would just ignore that and count the votes as they are on the ballot. On page 48, in the lower right-hand corner, looks like they corrected the target area, then they put a big X through the whole contest. They told us what they wanted, they signed it, but we're going to ignore that and just listen to their instructions. It does not disqualify this ballot. Same with an address label. We're just going to ignore the address and label. It does not invalidate their votes on this ballot. All right, moving on to Rule G, overvotes. So races or issues that have more than one target area marked than are allowed, in our case 1, that's going to be considered an overvote. No overvotes for that race or issue shall be counted. We do, however, account for how many overvotes we have in any given contest, and we report out at the end of the election how many overvotes exist. So we're keeping track of how many there are, just none of the actual candidates or responses will get the vote. There is an exception to Rule G if there's a write-in vote for a candidate that's already printed on the ballot, and we'll talk more about that in Rule I. Here's some examples of true overvotes, not valid votes for either of the candidate. You can see the target area is filled in for Abigail Adams as well as William Henry Harrison. That's going to be considered an overvote. Neither of those candidates received the vote. Rule H. If a name is written on a write-in line, it shall be counted as a valid write-in vote regardless of whether the corresponding target area is marked. I like to tell people it's the act of writing on the line that makes it a write-in vote. Doesn't matter if they fill in the target area or not. So page 53 has several examples to that effect. Example 1A shows writing on the line. That's a valid write-in vote. Example 1B and 1C have the target areas filled in and writing on the line. And then example 1D, again, target area not filled in, but all 4 of these examples are valid write-in votes. Rule I, when there's a write-in already on the ballot. So if the name of a candidate who's already printed on the ballot is written in, that vote shall not be tallied as an overvote because 2 target areas are filled in. It's going to be counted as a valid vote for the printed candidate. This applies even if both target areas are marked or no target area is marked. So let's look at these examples on page 55. Example 1A, we have the target area filled in for Abigail Adams, and then the writing on the line is for Abigail Adams. That is a valid vote for Abigail Adams, not going to be considered a write-in vote at all. Same for the other 3 examples, because Abigail Adams is written in on the write-in line. There are a couple name variations on the bottom, but we can tell that those belong to Abigail Adams. So all 4 examples here, the printed candidate of Abigail Adams will receive this vote. Name variations. So if a write-in vote is cast for a declared write-in candidate using a commonly recognizable nickname or spelling variation, it shall be counted as a valid vote for that candidate. Page 57 shows 4 great examples of name variations we might see for a candidate with the name Thomas Smith. You can see there's a variety of spellings using the full name Thomas, short name Thomas, Tom, and so on. All of those are valid votes for write-in candidate. For write-in candidate Thomas Smith, I should say. Rule K, write-in and a blank line. So if the write-in target area is marked, but there's nothing written in on the write-in line, it shall not be counted as a valid vote because there's no writing on the line. So again, we have to have writing on the line to consider it a write-in vote. So these are not valid write-in votes and will not be counted in the write-in category and will not be counted for any candidate because there's no writing on the line. All right, we're getting closer, folks. We're getting closer. Rule L. Rule L. We only go to S. We're close. Rule L. Write-in, blank line, and candidate. So, if a candidate's target area is marked and the write-in target area is marked, but no name is written in on the line, it shall not be tallied as an overvote, but shall be counted as a valid vote for the printed candidate. Here's some examples. Example 1A shows the target area filled in for William Henry Harrison. They filled in the target area for write-in, but there's no writing on the line. Remember, that's not considered a write-in vote. So all of these examples on page 61 are going to be considered valid votes for William Henry Harrison. Rule M, name combinations. If a write-in vote is cast for a candidate with a combination of names that are already on the ballot, it shall not be counted as a vote for either of the printed candidates. Instead, it shall be counted as a valid vote for the name as written. So here on our examples 1A and 1B, we have a printed candidate named Teddy Roosevelt. We have a printed candidate named Abigail Adams. So for both of these examples, there's a write-in for Teddy Adams, a combination of names. So we would not attribute this vote to either or any of the printed candidates. It's going to be considered a write-in vote for Teddy Adams. Rule N. If a candidate's target area is marked, the write-in target area is also marked, and something other than that candidate's name is written in on the write-in response area, it shall be counted as an overvote and not a valid vote for any candidate. If a candidate's target area is marked and the write-in target area is not marked, it shall be counted as a valid vote for the marked candidate. If voter intent cannot be ascertained, the ballot shall be referred to the canvassing board. You could think about this as like 3 strikes and you're out. So 3 actions have to happen for us to call it an overvote in which nobody gets the vote. So for example, 1A, you have the first action, we have Abigail Adams, target area is filled in. The second action, the write-in bubble, write-in target area is filled in. The third action, there's actually writing on the line. If all of those 3 things are happening, we would need to call this an overvote per this rule, Rule N. Same example for all 4 instances here. So even, and it might feel weird, but even for example 1C, where the writing says nobody, it's the act of writing on the line, we're still calling this a write-in vote, even though they wrote in the word nobody, still considered write-in. So because those 3 actions happen, this is going to be an overvote, for example 1C and 1B, even though it's Wonder Woman and nobody. Looking at it from the other way, so what if there's only 2 of those actions that happen? Here, Rule N, here's some more examples. For example, 2A, the first action was Abigail's target area got filled in. Second action, there's writing on the line, but there's not the third action. That write-in bubble is not filled in, or write-in target area, I should say, is not filled in. Therefore, it's not going to be considered an overvote, and it's a valid vote for the printed candidate. And so that's the same thinking for all 4 of these examples on this page. even though there's writing on the line, they did not fill in that write-in bubble. So it's a valid vote for the printed candidate. All right, write-ins when they're not eligible. So a write-in vote for a race not appearing on the voter's ballot shall not be counted. There's an exception when it comes to provisional ballots, but we're going to skip that because we really don't have provisional ballots anymore. I love this example because a lot of people feel strongly about things that happen in Seattle. You might work there, you might go there a lot, but if it's not on your ballot, you're not actually eligible to vote on it. So for this example, they're writing in their feelings on Seattle monorail. They want to say no to the monorail, but you can see their printed ballot does not include Seattle contest. They're not eligible, so we would ignore that and just count the votes on the printed ballot. Sometimes, however, voters are eligible and they might just put the response in the wrong place. So, a write-in vote for a race appearing somewhere else on the voter's ballot shall be counted as a valid vote as long as all other requirements are fulfilled and the office, position number, and political party, if applicable, are clearly indicated. And we can see here on page 71 a great example. So, State Representative, District 14, Position 1 is in the upper left-hand corner of the ballot. It appears the voter was not too sure which candidate they wanted to vote for. They voted for one, crossed it out, voted for another, crossed it out. But at the bottom of the example ballot here, they wrote in the information we need and they wrote in the response they want. This instance, we would attribute that vote to Teddy Roosevelt because the voter wrote the contest, State Representative District 14, and the position number, Position 1, and the response. So this would be a valid vote, and we would call that a write-in in the wrong place, but we would count that as a vote for Teddy Roosevelt. Ooh, messy marks. This one comes to the canvassing board quite regularly. When an otherwise valid vote, when otherwise valid votes marked in the target area partially extend into the response area, it shall be counted as a vote if most of the mark is in the target area and intent can clearly be discerned. So here's some examples. You have a check mark that goes into another target area. You have an X that the tail end goes into another target area. And for example 1C, most of the mark is in William Henry Harrison. It's pretty clear what most of the mark is, which target most of the mark is in. It can get tricky though, and we bring you the hard ones. We take the easy ones and deal with those.
I feel like everything we see is outside of this
Yes,
book.
yes.
But thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're going to skip Rule R, which is talking about a pattern of partisan voting, but it's good for you all to know that just because a voter might vote a certain party down a party line on one side of the ballot does not mean we can attribute votes to that party anywhere else on the ballot. So we cannot take partisan voting into account when making voter intent decisions. And here's my favorite rule. I'm going to read it because it's very great. It's called anything else. Voter intent on questionable ballots may not covered by the rules in this manual must be determined by the county canvassing boards according to all applicable laws of the state of Washington and the canvassing board manual. Where more than one rule may apply, the canvassing board has the authority to determine which rule is most appropriate. So it's an umbrella saying anything not in here, like Julie just mentioned, we take it to the canvassing board for review. And that concludes our annual review of the voter intent guide. Yay.
Great job, Geraldine. Thank you very, very much.
Now we're moving on to the fun stuff.
Does the board have any questions for Geraldine?
Yes.
No, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Geraldine. Now we got to put it into practice.
Yes.
Okay.
It's your test. Okay. First item for the board to review is item B-0001. For this one, okay, B-001, all of the candidate races. This voter wrote U.S. citizen only on every write-in line where there's a candidate race. Ordinarily, that would cause an overvote that we just talked about. 3 actions that happened. They filled in the target area for a candidate, filled in the write-in bubble, and then writing on the line. However, since it's consistent and they're writing the same words for every one, can we consider this a pattern of similar marks and give the vote to the printed candidate because they're making the same marks throughout the candidate. So it's 3 contests. Fill in a target area. They're using the same thing here. Can we call this a valid vote for the candidate?
And does the language on the left, does it say yes is a U.S. citizen? Is that, am I,
Yes is a U.S. citizen is what they put on the write-in line for all of them.
Are there written instructions on the back?
It's not written instructions. It's a bunch of other stuff.
Stephanie, you're right. Underneath the instructions, it says yes is a U.S. citizen, and then the write-in is U.S. citizen only. Geraldine, could you remind us the rule, pretty please, on the write-ins?
Yes. To ordinarily call that a overvote, rule N on page 64. But if we want to call it a pattern of similar marks, we're going to look at page 18.
Thank you. It's almost like written instruction, write-in, and
Pattern of
Pattern.
similar marks.
Like-
Yes.
right?
3 in 1.
Yes.
I feel like since this isn't a name, it's more of a pattern. It's not a name. It's not, the write-in rule is not applicable because it's not those 3 steps that you talked about. Like they've circled, they filled in the bubble for a person, filled in the write-in bubble, and then put a name down. So that distinguishes this a little bit for me. But
It's confusing because on page 65 you talked about that the write-in, even though it says nobody.
Correct. So for when we are looking at votes on a ballot, it's any act of writing. We're calling it a write-in.
Yes.
The reason we want to bring this forward is they wrote the exact same thing everywhere with a
Yes.
consistency.
Yes.
So if we're calling it a write-in, they're going to all be overvotes, and nobody gets the vote. But if we call it a consistent pattern, because they're writing the exact same, they're voting for a candidate, filling in the write-in line, and then writing the same words, if we look at it as a pattern of similar marks, then we could count those votes for the candidates as votes. But that's really the question.
Sure.
Yeah.
and because they wrote yes is a U.S. citizen over on the left, I'm thinking that the rationale is that's just it's just their pattern. It's not that's sort of an instruction or something. You know, that's not a person. I don't think they're thinking that's a person. Even nobody, right? It's not the absence of a person.
Mm-hmm. Board, what determination would you like to make on this ballot? Stephanie, you're,
I would count the votes for the people who've been bubbled in.
I agree. It looks like a pattern of similar marks.
great. The board has determined votes for Metropolitan King County Council District Number 8, Sophia. Port of Seattle Commissioner Position Number 5, Todd. City of Seattle Council District Number 7, Isabel.
Thank you very much. Now we're moving on to B-0002. Again, it's for all of the candidate races, but in this example, the voter put a question mark on every write-in line in addition to voting for a candidate. So, same rule. They filled in the vote for the printed candidate, they filled in the target area for the write-in line, and then they put a mark on the write-in line. So, same question.
I don't know, Kimberly, I tend to think this is kind of the same. I mean, because there's not, it seems like a pattern more than, there's not a person, there's not nobody, there's not, it's really kind of a pattern, I think. I don't know.
I agree.
Thank you, Board. The Board has made a determination for votes Port of Seattle Commissioner position number 5, a vote for Todd. City of Renton Council position number 7, a vote for Randy. Kent School District number 415, Director District number 3, a vote for Donald.
Up next is B-0003. So our question is the whole ballot, so all of the contests, there's nothing on the back. Yes, there is. There is another contest on the back, another measure on the back. The question is, this voter has made marks near the right-hand edge of the response area throughout the ballot. Are these votes? We could look at Rule B, pattern of similar marks. If so, what are the votes if we're looking at messy marks on page 72? But they're off far to the side. So number 1, are they votes? Number 2, if they are, what are they connected to?
It's definitely some sort of pattern.
But what are they trying to say? That's the question. I would have a hard time determining who, if there is an intent to make a selection, even on the write-in, because the marks are made on the kind of the write-in line, on the bottom right. But there is no write-in, and there's no, so I would have a really hard time in determining who this person is voting for.
I agree. There are some that are closer to, I don't know if we measure things or, because some of them are close to a selection and others are in the write-in area where there isn't a selection.
Board, am I hearing that we do not know what the voter intent is on this ballot, and therefore we can't count any of the ovals as specific votes in any of the races or ballot measure?
Yes.
Yes.
The board has made a determination that this ballot is undervoted for the King County Proposition number 1, Port of Seattle Position 5, Highline School District 1 and 4.
And there is one item on the back, I believe, as well.
Undervote means that no oval has been filled in. Thank you, board.
Okay, B-0004, we have one item on the front. For King County Proposition 1, what is the vote? You can see it's in between two target areas. So Rule Q, messy marks, is on page 72, which tells us if there's more of the mark in one oval than the other, that's going to be the vote.
This is where measuring would be helpful, right?
To me, it looked like more was in rejected.
I agree. I agree.
The board has determined for King County Proposition Number 1 a vote for rejected.
All right, B-0005. We have one item on the front. Another question of messy mark. We can see touching both ovals, but not sure which candidate might get the vote. And that was Seattle Council District Number 1.
Well, it looks like some of the ink is in Preston Anderson's bubble. The ink is not in Marin Costa's bubble.
I agree.
So I think this is a vote for Preston Anderson.
The board has made a determination for City of Seattle Council District Number 1 a vote for Preston.
Okay, B-0006. We have one contest on the front for Shoreline School District Number 412, Director District Number 4. Similar question, it's around a messy mark, and which candidate may receive that vote right here.
I'm glad we have these.
Might need to buy one for my purse for menus.
Yes.
This is a tougher call because it's right in between.
Well, I saw just a tiny bit. If you use your magnifying glass, you'll see there's a tiny bit that is in one of the ovals that I was seeing.
I think there's a tiny bit in both. There's a little hair of a mark in Zach, and there's a hair of a mark in Hazim. I would have a hard time, personally, I would have a hard time making the call on this one. Where do you see the, can you,
I only saw some in Hazim. I just see, I don't see any in Zach's.
Geraldine, could you put that back under the mic, and can we zoom in at all? Pretty please? Thank you.
Look at that.
Does it focus it some?
No. So if it's equal amounts touching, it could be an undervote, meaning it's not going into either. Or it could be an overvote if you think it's touching both. It would be up to the board.
What do you think?
I think it might be an undervote because I don't see it really, it's so in the center, and I feel like if it's touching either candidate, it's so sort of incidental, you know, it's not like it's sort of somebody scribbled something and they just so happened to get it in both, like a smidge, you know, I can't make the determination from that.
I agree, undervote.
Great. The board has made a determination for Shoreline School District Number 412, Director District Number 4, undervote, meaning no vote for any candidates recorded in that race. Thank you, board.
Okay, B-0007, we have one contest on the front for King County Proposition Number 1. Again with the messy marks for you. Maybe I'll put a little closer. Oops.
It's funny because the messy marks in the rule book they're messy, but they're pretty obvious, you know, for
Yes.
not quite a real life example. Yeah, this is another one where it's a scribble in between. I see a little in the approved, a little in the rejected.
This looks like an over to me as opposed to the other one that had nothing in either.
I would agree with that.
The board has made a determination that for King County Proposition Number 1, that this is an overvote, meaning both ovals will be recorded, and therefore not a vote.
Okay, B-0008. We have one item on the front. The upper right-hand corner for Port of Seattle Commissioner Position Number 5. This is our last messy mark of the meeting. Then we'll move on to other hard stuff. Okay. Here's a closer view. Oh, there we go.
Too close.
I know. I was like, okay. Back off a little.
To me, it looks like there's more in Todd Curtis.
There's definitely more in Todd Curtis. But there is some stray markings. I mean, it could just be stray markings, right? That they just literally missed the mark a little bit and tried to bubble in above. So you would consider this a vote for Todd Curtis?
What is the stray mark rule?
Stray marks are a exception to target area rule A, so very beginning of the book. So it's the first
Yes, I see.
exception. Okay.
And what's interesting about that is that the examples of stray marks are typically sort of detached from the mark itself, right? It's this we have maybe a stray mark that's sort of a flourish of the fill-in.
Yes.
I like the messy mark rule for this one. I'm not sure what the board is thinking, but sort of when otherwise valid votes marked in a target area partially extend into the response area, It shall be counted as a vote if most of the mark is in the target area and intent can easily be discerned.
But here, most of the mark is outside of the target area, and intent cannot easily be.
Yeah,
discerned.
I think that's our answer. I think that we can't really determine, that can't be counted definitively.
I agree.
Okay, board, next hard question. There is ink in both. Do we want to call it an overvote, or there's not much ink in both? Do we want to call it an undervote?
I would say an undervote.
I agree.
The board has determined Port of Seattle Commissioner position number 5 an undervote. No oval filled in.
Moving on to B-0009, we have a single item on the front. So for King County proposition number 1, is this a vote for approved? It does touch the outline a little bit. And it is the only
The only thing that's
mark
marked.
on the ballot. Because there's nothing on the back.
And we can have a pattern of one, correct?
Correct.
I think going back to some things you said earlier, we can have a pattern of one. The person took the time to fill something on the ballot and send it in, so I would tend to count it as a vote for approved.
I agree. Some of it is touching the approved.
The board has determined for King County Prop 1 a vote for approved.
Okay, B-0010, we have one item on the front. King County Proposition 1, are these votes, or are they stray marks or hesitation marks? There's a little dot, there's a little bit bigger of a dot. The mark in approved seems less definite, it's smaller. There's a little bit more of a mark in rejected. But notice the weakness of the other marks on the ballot. Could we think of this as a voter fatigue situation? Like they started off strong and got smaller. Maybe they started from the bottom and went up. So, tiny little mark, a little bit bigger of a mark. I don't know if they're votes.
I feel like these other, even though they're not, the ovals aren't completely filled in, I feel like there's more effort, and you can even see sort of darker mark, they've been using more pressure compared to this, where in the approved it just is like almost like a dot. I mean, it's really faint, and it's really just kind of, but rejected is not much more. It just doesn't seem as intentional as these other ovals, even though the rest of the ovals are not like completely filled in, but they seem more intentional. I would consider these probably stray marks.
What rule did you recommend, Geraldine, for us to look at?
Rule A talks about target area, and then those exceptions to Rule A. So the first, starting on page 2, talks about exceptions, and then you'll see some examples of the exceptions.
So I'm looking at the rule on the exception on page 13, and this looks similar to that to me.
Right.
The approved looks to me like a hesitation mark. It just looks like there are more strokes in the rejected, and it's more of a rest and approved.
I think the question for me is that line through rejected is definitely a little, it's a little more visible but compared to the rest of the ballot, is it an actual vote like the rest of the ballot, or is it just, someone putting their pen down? Do you think it's a vote for rejected?
I'd have to look
That's tough.
at it. I don't remember which one.
They're always finding ways to challenge us. And
Yes, to me it looks like a vote for rejected with a hesitation mark in approved.
And it could be. I mean, like you said, maybe the person started from the bottom up, and then by the time they got to the top, they got a little tired. And okay, I can agree with that.
The board has made a determination that there's more ink in the oval for rejected for King County Prop 1. It's determined it's a vote for rejected.
Okay, B-0011, we have a single item on the front. So Port of Seattle Commissioner position number 5. There's a check mark next to Todd and some sort of X type symbol next to Jesse. Is this a written instruction to vote for Todd, or should we leave it as an overvote? You could look at written instructions on page 44 if we want to think about the check mark or the the X as possible written instructions. And here's a little close-up.
I was just trying to see if that X or asterisk or if was any sort of instruction to us, but I cannot decipher
Is
an
there
instruction.
a rule about corrections, specifically corrections? Which rule is that?
Corrections is 34. Rule C.
Thank you. Because it's sort of an X, it's sort of an asterisk as well. I mean, it's not a clear like X, like, but I mean, there is a check mark. I mean, the check mark usually indicates yes. Kimberly, see.
I agree. Usually an X means you don't want something and a check means you do want something. So I would count this as a vote for Todd Curtis.
I agree.
The board has determined for Port of Seattle Commissioner position number 5 that it's a vote for Todd.
Okay, last ballot of the afternoon is B-0012, single item on the front. Okay. For King County Proposition number 1, is the slash through rejected a vote for rejected, given the context of none next to the ballot, next to it, and the larger note, President of America, the great only love to people of America. Let's see. Ordinarily, we'd call this too unclear to be a written instruction that you can see on page 44. But since it's the only mark on the ballot, they didn't try to select anything anywhere else. If we determine that the mark is directly associated with rejected and isn't a written instruction to vote for none, then we would probably call it a vote for rejected. But there's a lot of conversation in this.
Yeah, That's a tough one, especially since they drew a slash through rejected
Yes.
and said none. It makes me think they don't want that option, that's not what they're trying to do. And I think the President of America writing is just sort of it's almost like a distraction. It's something that there's no instruction to it. I think this is not, to me, it's not a vote, or it's not anything.
To me, I think the instruction is none. There's no vote, and I don't know what the President of America
Yeah.
language is.
Yeah.
Awesome job, canvassing board. This last ballot here, they have made a determination for undervote for King County Prop 1, meaning no ovals filled in.
And that is all I have to present to the board this afternoon.
Great job, board. Those were hard ballots and getting back in the groove for this primary election. Very much appreciate it. Appreciate you, Geraldine Hampton, our ballot processing manager, and the entire team here at King County Elections and the ballot processing team that prepared these ballots. Is there any further? We will meet again on Tuesday.
So we have a motion.
Yeah, you would like a motion?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay. Ms. Hampton would like a motion. Could I get one from the board, pretty please?
I make a motion for the King County election staff to count the ballots as marked.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meaning that all of the ballots there are accepted and will be processed as we determined those votes to be.
Yes.
We will be meeting again on Tuesday to certify this primary election. Is there any further business at this time?
Nope.
Not for me.
No, thank you.
Okay, great. The canvassing board meeting is adjourned at 2:41 p.m. on Thursday, August 10th, 2023. Thank you.